Okay, well, maybe we'll go ahead and get going. I suspect we'll have more people joining us as the minutes tick by, but we are delighted to have you all here. And again, my name is Tom Fleischner. I'm the executive director of the Natural History Institute, which is a mission-based independent nonprofit based here in the Mogollon Highlands ecoregion, specifically in Prescott, Arizona, where some of you are also from. I said that we are a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to provide leadership and resources for a revitalized practice of natural history that integrates art, science, and humanities to promote the health and well-being of humans and the rest of the natural world. So simply put, you could say that our job is to foster love and understanding of the world and try to sort of create a more reciprocity in our interactions with the natural world. I would mention, for those of you who are not familiar with our work, would welcome you to visit our website, naturalhistoryinstitute.org. A lot of great resources on there, and also our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is a lot of great stuff on there, including actually a video of Kathy giving a talk at one of our conferences. And also, certainly, like all small nonprofits, we're dependent on the support of people who value our work. So we would invite you also, if you feel so moved, to make a contribution to us, which you can do right on the homepage of our website. All that said, welcome to our community, the Institute, and to this event here this evening. I just want to say a couple of things. I know at the end of this last year, probably many of us are Zoom experts, but in the chance that some of you might be new to this platform, a couple of things is that as I've already invited people to be saying hello on the chat function, but in just a few minutes we'll be turning that off just so it's not a distraction during the conversation. But there's another function on the bottom of the screen there which says Q&A, and we would invite you to use that once we get going. So if Kathy, or myself for that matter, says something and you have a follow-up question or you would like to make a comment, go ahead at any time and add things to the Q&A function. And then later on towards the end, I'll start sort of sifting through those and probably consolidating some of them and passing on questions to Kathy. Also I mentioned our YouTube channel. This is also simultaneously live streaming on YouTube and will be archived on our YouTube channel basically tomorrow. So that said, I wanted to have a shout out to, we have several wonderful organizations co-sponsoring this event tonight. I want to acknowledge all of them. I will first mention the Peregrine Book Company, which is our ally right around the corner here in Prescott, Arizona. And they you can get all of Kathy's books, including this wonderful one, which we'll be talking about especially today. Earth's Wild Music, and I put their website link in the first comment in the chat, but I'll say it's just peregrinebookcompany.com, and they are good friends and allies of ours here. Also Counterpoint Press, wonderful publisher who published this book, the Safina Center, the Spring Creek Project, for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word, which Kathy co-founded, which is based at Oregon State University. The Center for Humans and Nature, great allies of ours in Chicago. The Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill, which is a wonderful facility at the University of Arizona, also good long-term allies of ours. And Playa, a center for the intersection of art and science, a wonderful residency center where I know both Kathy and I have had the opportunity to spend important time in the past. So thank you to all of our co-sponsors. And that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor and primary speaker here tonight, Dr. Kathleen Dean Moore. There's much that could be said, but I'll try to keep it brief. So Kathy is, of course, a writer of many books, including among them River Walking, The Pine Island Paradox, Wild Comfort, Moral Ground, a novel, Great Tide Rising, and of course this book that we'll be talking about today, her most recent Earth's Wild Music, and several others. She's also a moral philosopher, and sometimes people sort of claim that mantle. Kathy, is what we're talking about, is kind of the real deal. Was her academic specialty. And in that role, she was for many years a distinguished professor and chair of the Department of Philosophy at Oregon State University. She is an activist, and as I was thinking of, Kathy, your work in the world, I remembered a term that I encountered in Australia, which was an inspirator. I think some of your work is to inspire the rest of us, and we appreciate that. And in all different ways, basically, Kathy has been a voice for sanity and action in the world. So we're very appreciative of that.
Thank you, Tom. That's awfully nice of you.
Yeah. And it's really a special fun here tonight for us, because this event is also based in friendship and sort of comradeship. Kathy and I over the years have discovered how much our paths have intertwined. Starting, actually, we realized that we grew up at the same time and essentially in the same place, right, about 10 miles apart along the same river in Ohio. So we shared the childhood landscape. I realized that almost undoubtedly I attended programs in the urban park system there that her father led, and so on. We have shared an interest in the balancing between philosophy and natural history. I actually started college as a philosophy major and then switched over towards natural history and ecology. Kathy is, as I said, an academic philosopher who has a deep interest and understanding of natural history. We've also, and pertinent to tonight's discussion and this particular book, share a love of music. And we've interacted on some book projects. And then as we'll be talking about here in a little bit, our work has really converged in the last few years on the importance of love. And we'll be talking a little bit about that. So
Kathy, I think it's just terrific. If I can interrupt you there,
absolutely.
that we grew up so close together and may well have interacted down there in the park in some way. Think how much trouble we could have made if we'd known each other back then. That would have been good. Yeah.
Right.
And what people should know is that this is Rocky River Metro Park, and this is not a pristine place. And so the inspiration for both you in all your natural history work and me in all my nature writing comes from a park that is basically a circle around Cleveland. Right. And this was a place that was right under the final approach for Cleveland Hopkins Airport. So these DC-3s would lumber thunder in all the time and drown out the birds. And teenagers would drive their cars right into the river and wash them, and then just take buckets out of the river and rinse them off right in the river. So I think it's important that it's possible to be inspired by a place that's wounded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. My house where I was for the first 8 years of my life was so close to that airport that the whole neighborhood has been torn down, and literally where my house stood for my first 8 years of my life is now where the rental car agency for the airport is. You can still see the old street signs.
I'm really sorry to hear that. That is not a pleasant place now.
Yeah. Anyway, I do want to congratulate you on this wonderful book that we'll be focusing on a bit here. It will be, of course, more expansive than just the book, but people get to hear some excerpts. So congratulations, and on yet another beautiful and inspiring book. And this, I just thought I would sort of introduce by saying that this book, I feel it's really important because it deals directly with what I consider to be the sort of primary psychological challenge of our time, of this time in the world, which is how do we find an authentic balance between heartbreaking beauty of the world and the heartbreaking sense of loss of what is happening to that world. And that is really, of course, just an incredible paradox. And as we have, I know both were inspired in the past by the wonderful E.B. White, as he so often did, put this very, very succinctly. He said, I arise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. And I had that on my office door for many years. So and I think just increasingly this paradox of two types of heartbreak, you might say, becomes is the overarching issue that we humans have to deal with. And so I just have a lot of admiration for you and your work as a writer and as a thinker in this book, and your capacity to tell a really compelling and even charming and at times humorous set of stories while still engaging truthfully in the realities of the sort of stark moral choices that lie before us. And I think the reason you're able to do that is because the narrative is also infused with a sense of delight at the world, and it isn't just doom and gloom. It's weaving those together masterfully. So thank you. And of course, I think that is knowing you, that is the same could be said of you as a person, and so that it really comes through in the writing. So thank you for the book. And if I thought we could have you start with a reading from the book, and certainly if there's anything you'd like to say about the genesis of the book, how it came about, certainly feel free.
Sure. I wanted to first of all express admiration for E.B. White. What a wonderful man. And if he were alive today, he would be all involved, I think, with what people are now starting to call multi-solving, where you solve more than one problem at the same time. Because I think that his delight in the world was his primary motivation for wanting to save it. So it seems that they're in conflict, but on the other hand, the delight feeds the work, feeds the environmentalist work. So yeah, we've learned that was my primary challenge in writing this book, was how to open people's hearts without breaking them.
Mm-hmm.
How to write like a wave on the beach, where you lift people up and then you drop them. Anybody who's been caught in a wave knows exactly that feeling. Oh my God! And then bam, onto the beach. But
Right.
even as we delight in the world, and I'm sure everybody's listening here does, they're here because they do love the world. You can't just sit around, as my mother-in-law says, and say, "Oh, isn't it lovely? Oh, be joyful." Because honestly, there are people out there who are, for fun and profit, great profit, unbelievable profits, wrecking things, killing things, poisoning things, destroying habitats. And I could just take a single example, the sage grouse, um, which is now at 98% loss, primarily or probably because of big ag and big oil destroying their habitat. So there's no possibility of just going out and enjoying everything. We all really have to be involved in the effort. Um, I said to my neighbor, I said, I'm writing this book about the loss of the world's music. And she says, "What, is that a thing?" I go, "Oh, my dear, it is a thing." And I started to tell her, like, I've been writing for 50 years. And in that time, since 1970, 60% of all the individual mammals have disappeared off the face of the earth, leaving 40% of what there was when I started writing. And songbirds, the birds that we love, the robins, the red-winged blackbirds, are at only 60% of what they used to be. They've had a greater than 30% loss. Half of the grassland birds are gone. So I'll end up my career writing in a world that is half as rich and song-graced as the world that I started writing in. That is an astonishing fact. So what do I want to say? What does a person say in that last essay? After have to see that loss, is the book, is your last essay going to be a celebration? Is it going to be a lamentation? Is it going to be a prayer for forgiveness? I mean, these are the kind of questions that I was asking myself. And, what are my options when I write this book? And so what I did was I decided that I'm going to celebrate the natural world. I'm going to do everything I can to show how delightful it is and how absolutely unbelievable and ingenious that world is out there. How beautiful, how astonishing, how sacred, I want to say. And then at the end of every essay, there will be a box. And in that box, it will tell the absolute facts about that species and its prospects for living to the end of the century. The wave comes up, gently drops you down again. So yeah, so
Yeah.
when you ask me if that my motivations and my thinking about writing that book, that's pretty much where I came from.
Yeah, and you, as you say, it's astonishing that loss. It's equally astonishing that that loss can happen with so little recognition from our species, and it just goes on as business as usual so often, or else we feel it in some kind of gut way, but in a abstraction or not quite sure what we're feeling. So
Yeah,
yes.
when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and the DDT trucks spraying were going through the trees and the birds were dying, they fell out of the trees onto the sidewalk in convulsions. And so there was an absolute evidence right in front of everybody's eyes that this was killing the birds. But, when the great fires took over California just last summer, the swallows detoured over the desert. And I don't know, did you see them fall in flocks out of the sky?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So it's really hard to see what isn't there, and it's really hard to hear what is silenced. So yeah, it's an invisible crisis.
Yeah.
It's Pope Paul or Pope Francis calls the climate crisis silent voices screaming up to heaven. I
Mm.
thought that was pretty apt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we hear some of an excerpt from the book?
Yes, yes. Let me find let me how's the dawn chorus? Is that okay?
That would be wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Who among us hasn't seen the image of Earth from space as the planet turns under the light of the sun and morning advances? Always half spangled black, half glistening blue and green, the ball rolls, and mountains and coastlines, seas and continents slowly emerge into the sun. It stirs me, I have to say, to watch satellite video of morning flowing over the earth like a bright tide. I imagine boats full of brass choirs bumping along the advancing edge of the flow, heralding the morning. But in fact, that's almost exactly what has happened every day for how many days? 60 million years. So 28,900,000,000 days. For that many days, there have been birds that stir in the breeze that precedes the sunrise, lift their heads, and begin to sing. The dawn chorus, people call it, the especially brilliant bird songs that begin the day. Who knows why birds pour out their hearts first thing in the morning? Maybe the air is cool and sound travels farther. Maybe the morning, before the foraging gets good, is spare time that the birds fill with singing, the avian analog of a second cup of coffee. Most probably, though, singing in the morning demonstrates fitness, saying, I am strong. I am fully alive. I have lived through the night and emerged full throated from my dark shelter with energy and joy to spare. That's a good reason to sing. Recording artists have followed the sun around the world, recording the dawn chorus on continent after continent, the great unrolling of song as the earth turns. Again, that tide of sparkling light advancing over the darkness, lifting song after song. Imagine the magic of this planet. Dear God, we live on a music box that plinks out music as the earth turns. No, we live on something even more magical than a music box, because pink morning light, not little metal pins, plucks the prongs. Who could have the whimsy and aesthetic abandon to invent such a marvelous machine? Who wouldn't treasure it and pass it down carefully preserved to the children.
Thank you. I love the notion that we're living on a music box.
Do you want me to tell you the next part, or do you want me not to?
Sure.
That I talked with Gordon Hempton, who is one of these recordists who has been around the world recording, and he made the first LP record of the Dawn Chorus. And he says he couldn't do that anymore. He couldn't have made that music now. There's not enough birdsong to make a chorus.
So there again is the heartbreaking beauty and the heartbreaking sense of loss. So I wanted to burrow in a little bit to the idea that you get at in the book of sort of like who we are as humans. You make the astute observation in the book that we as a species have, you call it a mixed blessing, bestowed by regret about the past and preoccupation about the future. And we're not so often, of course, living right in the present moment, and that is probably unique to our species. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts on how that sort of paradox of who we are might be more purely a blessing rather than less mixed of a blessing, you might say. Is there something about that notion of having awareness of both past and future that might allow us, it might help us in this moment as we try to find our way?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, philosophers love to quarrel with questions, and so just a little quarrel with your question.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure that human beings are the only ones who can feel regret about what they've done, because I think dogs, for example, can be ashamed. They are really sad when they're ashamed. So interesting that so many human beings are shameless, and even animals that we consider beneath us can exhibit that kind of moral misgiving. Anyway,
right.
But let me just say it. I think the word blessing is exactly the right one. Um, our gifts are a blessing, an undeserved gift. And I'm wondering now if, when you pose that question of how are we going, what do we have, what gifts do we have that we can use to get through this preoccupation with the future and regret for the past, which is a sticking point? It might be gratitude. I mean, could gratitude help us here? I have said before that I don't think it's possible to be grateful and sad at the same time. I'm not sure that that's true, and I've been examining my own experience that way. But gratitude, looking to the past and being glad rather than regretful, being glad for what has been given, and looking to the future and understanding our obligation to give back the gift. You mentioned the word reciprocity. Robin Kimmerer does a beautiful job talking about reciprocity. So maybe what I'm going to call an intentional awareness that the world is beautiful, an intentional awareness that the world is giving us these gifts. It feeds us, it shelters us, it nourishes us, it keeps us alive, and it buries us when we're dead. So if we can keep in the top of our mind this ability to give thanks for the gifts and to vow to give them back in kind, then I think we might be able to escape that sticking point between regret and preoccupation.
Yeah, it seems like a big part of the challenge is to not let those things, whether it's looking past or looking forward, to immobilize us. And too often that's what happens. I mean, it can immobilize people because they feel frozen up by it, or it can also, or some people just don't have that awareness in the first place. But so finding that sort of middle path of not being attached to it, but as you say, sort of cultivating a sense of gratitude and receptivity to the gifts of the world seems to be what we're talking about. And this actually ties in very directly to a lot of the work that we do here at the Natural History Institute. I mean, in recent years, I've more and more taken to sometimes referring to my shorthand definition of natural history is it's the practice of falling in love with the world.
Really, really nice.
That it's, or a little more formally, a practice of intentional, focused attentiveness and receptivity to the more than human world. But I think that again ties into what you're talking about here of the more that we can cultivate that sense of gratitude, then the more we can be sort of emotionally limber, you might say, and able to respond.
Yeah, but I don't want to pretend that I have any. I mean, you're offering me very hard questions, Tom, and I don't want to pretend that I have a particular answer. I think we're all really, really trying.
Yes. But I think finding one of the value of something like your book, and then the value in gathering appreciators of that work together, like an event like this, is that it's sort of it buoys us all up as a sense of that we have allies and we have supporters and we have people that understand. So maybe following up on that a little bit, I did want to bring up this question of we've bandied around the word love a little bit, and that is certainly something that you and I have realized that our work has sort of converged on a little bit in the last few years, is being more and more explicit about the importance of acknowledging that love. And as I just mentioned, I've talked about natural history as a practice of falling in love with the world. So, and you mentioned in the book, you talk about love in a number of places. At one place, you mentioned that love is measured in comfort, joy, and grief, which I think is beautiful. But I think maybe it would be time for another reading.
Right, because I want to be really clear about what I think love is and what love calls us to, because it's easy to be cliched or glib when you start talking about love. I mean, let's be honest. Hallmark has kidnapped the word love and tied it in very tight bonds, and
Right.
so we're gonna have to work to reclaim that,
Right.
that concept, and really think about what it calls us to do. So, Tom, I'd like to read this piece where I make the case about what I think of love as being.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start midway through this essay where I have my daughter out at our little farm by the pond. She's a baby. I held my granddaughter in my arms and sang to her then, an old lullaby that made her soften like wax in a flame, molding her little body to my bones. She fell asleep in my arms, unafraid. I will tell you, I was so afraid. Poets warned us, writing of the heartbreaking beauty that will remain when there is no heart to break for it. But what if it's worse than that? What if it's the heartbroken children who remain in a world without beauty? When my granddaughter looks back at me, I will be on my knees begging her to say I did all I could. I didn't do all I could have done. It isn't enough to love a child and wish her well. It isn't enough to open my heart to a bird-graced morning. Can I claim to love a morning if I don't protect what creates its beauty? Can I claim to love a child if I don't use all the power of my beating heart to preserve a world that nourishes children's joy? Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, to protect it fiercely and faithfully for all time. Ring the Angelus for the salmon and the swallows. Ring the bells for frogs floating in bent reeds. Ring the bells for all of us who did not save the songs. Holy Mary, Mother of God, ring the bells for every sacred emptiness. Let them echo in the silence at the end of the day. Forgiveness is too much to ask. I would pray for only this, that our granddaughter would hear again that little lick of music, that grace note toward the end of a meadowlark song. Meadowlarks. There were meadowlarks. They sang like angels in the morning. And now the little box. The population of meadowlarks are declining and sometimes plummeting across the United States. For the eastern meadowlark, a 7 million decline. For the western, a decline of 6 million. The primary causes of decline are widespread pesticides use and habitat loss as their prairies are converted to cropland and fracking pads. It can't continue. It can't continue the conversion of habitat, the homelands, to an infrastructure that's determined to cause the end of civilization.
Thank you for that. That's actually one of my favorite pieces in the book. You also excuse me. You mentioned in the book, you say we privileged people have not loved enough, and I wanted to explore a little bit with you this idea of privilege, and how does that tie in to some of the work that we have to do in terms of things like environmental justice, and how to social justice and ecological thriving connect with one another, and how are they sort of mutually necessary for one another, and colonialism and racism inherent in extractive industries and connecting to human rights. I know this could be a whole nother conversation, and I know you also might I know you with collaborators just released a film yesterday actually about some of these topics, so feel free to tell us about that too. But any off the cuff answers to how to solve all the problems of the world? Just kidding.
We have just lived through an extraordinary year. And I think one of the most absolutely thrilling things that happened there was the way that environmental justice has become the environmental as we say, it has become the leading edge of environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that environmental justice joins social justice on the one hand and ecological thriving on the other hand, pointing out that you can't have one without the other.
Right.
If you don't have social justice, you won't have ecological thriving. And the same way, if you don't have ecological thriving, you can't have social justice.
Right.
And I confess that I have been slow to understand the connection between these two. But it is absolutely thrilling to be able to be reading all this flood of new literature, all these new books that are coming out that give all of us a chance to understand better now. So I have just like 4 sentences I want to read. It's kind of a before and after story here. It says in here, looking back, talk about the regret for the past, okay? Looking back, we have allowed ourselves to think. What is it to me that I'm talking about both people and natural and the animals? What is it to me if they are hungry or cold or displaced from their homes? What is it to me if their habitat is bulldozed, their means of subsistence is destroyed, and their offspring die of hunger or despair? If exhaustion and misery are the price to be paid for prosperity, how convenient that we can send the bill to animals and to the poor and displaced. That's not possible anymore. It's not possible for us to even begin to think that that is convenient. So I've been doing this project, and I'm most interested in it because what it does is it's an environmental justice project that links human right violations and fracking and climate change, based on a tribunal, an international human rights tribunal. And it's allowed me to really think about the way that concept of human rights and the violations of the right to water, the right to health, the right to indigenous control of their lands The rights to information and participation are being violated wholesale by the fracking industry. But also, will climate change is going to be the greatest violation of human rights the world has ever seen. Um, so finally, we have now this notion of social justice that's embedded in the great human rights documents. One of the most wonderful things I think to come was this great consensus after World War II in these basic standards of human decency in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. How that can, when we use that as a lens or as a spotlight to show what's happening with the industry, the big oil industry. You see, I get almost apoplectic when I start talking about when you apply that to what the big oil is doing, then you can start to see that social activists, social justice activists, and environmental thriving activists have to just walk arm in arm against these forces that are so unbelievably destructive.
Absolutely. Number of years ago, I, with a colleague, Randall Amster, who some people on the session may know, and I developed a course together called Integrating Social and Ecological Perspectives to try to highlight for students the inseparability of these things, because some people do come in thinking one's more important than the other. And we would do an exercise on the very first day where we'd have the students generate a list of what are generally considered environmental problems, and then on another list of what are social problems. And then we would go through and have them look at everything on both lists and try to show how it actually could also be on the other list. And then we challenge them if they could at any time during the whole semester come up with anything that belonged on only one list. And of course, nobody could. So it's...
and of course, we used to think we could.
Yep.
But
Yep.
how much more interesting it will be, and how much more effective people will be now that we understand that.
Yeah.
Good for
Yeah.
you.
So that leads kind of, I want to, we're really in the realm now clearly of what happens to be your academic expertise, which
Oh.
is, which is the nature of moral behavior, really. And so, and I mentioned in the introduction, and actually I want to interrupt myself for a second and also just moderator here, remind people that you are welcome to, if you have questions or comments, to post them in the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So you can do that at any time. So anyways, I mentioned when introducing you that you are a moral philosopher by both inclination and training and profession. And you there's one sentence that jumped out at me in the book. You said the extinction crisis shimmers with suffering. That makes it not just an environmental crisis, but a moral catastrophe, which I think is beautifully put. And so I'm just curious, since this is something you've thought about for decades, is the nature of moral behavior. Would you say that there is a moral imperative for humans to listen to love, to take care of the world? Is that something that we should just consider as a given, that that's part of the moral responsibility of humans, or is that just a construct that people like you and me are making up?
No, I don't think. I do think so. I've just been reading a wonderful book, and I'd like to tell everybody its name. It's called Fathoms, as in 6 fathoms. It's called Fathoms, and it's about the great whales. It's a wonderful book. One of the things it suggests is that we have no concept of what suffering is in a whale. And it asks the questions, if the whales are the biggest creatures on the planet, is their suffering equally big? And when I read that sentence, I just sat back in my chair and I said, we don't know. We just don't know. It's unbelievable. It's unimaginable. And so it's unimaginable that we would hurt them without even, when their suffering is unimaginable too. So, but yes, okay, so you asked me a very serious question, and I will address it directly. Do we have an obligation to the world, do we have an obligation to the future to leave a world as rich in possibilities as the world that we inherited? And the answer to that, I can tell you, is absolutely yes. And I can tell you that because my colleague Michael Nelson and I did a book called Moral Ground, where we asked 100 of the world's moral leaders, people like the Dalai Lama and Pope Benedict and Bell Hooks and E.O. Wilson and Scott Momaday, whom you probably know. And we asked them exactly that question. And we asked them to respond in 2,000 words or less. And we got back the most beautiful collection of pieces. Do we have an obligation? Yes, for the survival of humankind. Yes, for the sake of the children. Yes, to honor our duties of gratitude. Yes, for the stewardship of God's creation. I'm reading the table of contents. Yes, because compassion requires it. Yes, because justice demands it. Yes, because we love the world. Yes, because our moral iniquity requires us to do what's right. You can choose from that list, and the list actually goes on, which one of those moral reasons speaks most clearly to you. I don't think there's one right answer. Our effort was to bring in as many reasons as we can, hoping that among this great collection, people would be able to find one that moved them.
Mhm.
So when I was teaching, I taught at natural philosophy in the mountains for many years. And I put each of these reasons on a card and I set those along the length of a log. And I asked the students to um, find three things, three natural things, a pine cone, a flower, a piece of lichen, whatever they wanted, and to use this as vote markers and to put one of those markers on the reason that spoke most powerfully to them, and they could choose three. So it was really a very beautiful thing that all arrayed along this log were these bouquets of wonderful things, the pine cones, the things that had caught these students' eyes. And do you want to guess which was the most powerful reason?
Children?
No, no. Although I think that if these weren't such young people, that
Yeah,
might have
right,
spoken to
right,
them.
right.
It was moral integrity,
Hmm.
that we have an obligation to do what we think is right, and that defines who we are, and that we need to create a kind of wholeness, like integrity, like integer, a whole number, um,
Right.
where there is a matching between what we believe is right and what we actually do, so that we can be proud of ourselves and think of ourselves as worthy. And I was really happy for the students that they came to that.
Yeah.
It's a very, I would say, Aristotelian answer because it has to do with character.
And that was consistent through the years?
Yes.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So, so, so my answer to you is yep, yep, yep,
An
yep. We
emphatic
have.
yes.
Yep.
So I'm aware that I'm just trying to be aware of time here a little bit, but I did want to kind of explicitly address one of the words of your title, which is music,
Oh,
and
good.
the role of music. And as I mentioned before, I know that a love of music is another one of those things that you and I share. Not necessarily the same music, but perhaps I know there's overlap, and I think one of the wonderful things about the book is that it really highlights how thoroughly the world is infused with music, or and maybe put differently, how much most of us who are fortunate enough we live in a world of sound, and that sound is one of those things that we tend to not pay attention to. So the book brings that all out into the open in a wonderful way. I've sometimes said that I think that music is like the greatest thing that people have ever figured out how to do. Like there's nothing in our evolution. Some would argue that there's evolutionary reasons specifically for it in terms of adaptiveness and whatnot. But it seems to me that it's an emergent property of who we are, and um, I used to for many years I taught conservation biology, which of course deals with many of the same topics as your book in terms of extinction and loss and so on. And I would mention to students on the first day that facts and feelings are both important, that we need both of them, and which again is one of the reasons I appreciate your book. But it seems to me that music is something that helps us transcend the bounds of our rationality, that the facts, in other words, can only go so far, and then the feelings are a lot of what actually drives our behavior. And music is something that just sort of jet starts that sense of feeling and allows us to open up. So I think it's a really powerful way. That's another reason why this is so powerful. And so we wanted to share. You've done a beautiful sort of side project off of this in collaboration with one of our co-sponsors, the Spring Creek Project, of coming up, working with a set of collaborations between various writers who are reading excerpts from your words from this book with musicians who are improvising with that. And there's a series of beautiful videos online and through the Spring Creek Project. And so if you just look up Music to Save Earth songs, there's a treasure trove of wonderful stuff. But we were going to share one of those with you now with the help of my esteemed colleague, Bob Ellis, who's behind the scenes here. If he's going to show us one of these, and then we'll take it from there. And I'll just say while it's starting up that there's a bit of technical issue in doing it through here, so we encourage you to also go back and listen to this on your own later on as well.
After the sizzle of a campfire supper, the fried onions and potatoes, after the balloon of the moon had floated above the dark desert mountains, Frank and I drove out to the sand dunes to listen for Sidewinder rattlesnakes. The rising moon poured light on the sand, sharpening the shadow of every bush, each dent and lizard scrape. We moved carefully, even though the Sidewinder is a small snake, only slightly longer than a piccolo, and only moderately poisonous. It didn't take long to find a Sidewinder's track. It can't be mistaken for anything else. The Sidewinder moves by bracing her tail and the lower part of her body against the sand and throwing her head and body forward. The snake track is a series of diagonal lines drawn across the direction of the snake's path. We followed the track, expecting that where the marks disappeared, we would find the snake buried in sand with just its viper eyes sticking out, waiting in ambush for a careless lizard. But no, we found the snake in debris under a stunted mesquite, perfectly patterned like debris under a stunted mesquite. In the disguise and shadow, we could barely make out its curve, so we stepped closer. It is impossible not to jump away from the sound of a rattlesnake, not like a snake, but like an electrical short. We jumped back and crashed and ended up hugging each other to stay upright. That's what you do when you are surprised and unbalanced, don't you? You hold on tight to any available shoulders. We froze, not knowing which way the snake was moving. It was a beautiful night. The breeze smelled of dust and the strong smoky scent of creosote bushes. Moonlight gleamed over the swells of the dunes. The air was cool on our sunburnt skin. In that absolute silence, we could hear the sand hiss under the slight weight of the snake, throwing itself away from us across the dune.
Wonderful. So again, I wanted to, as you, I think the names mostly came up there, but just to acknowledge the reader there was Craig Childs, who's a wonderful writer himself, and percussionist was Jonathan Rodriguez, who you just saw his picture, and then the pianist was Chris Ryman. So and again, would encourage you to go onto that website and because there's what, a dozen or so, maybe even more.
There are 20.
20. And
Yeah.
all with different people reading the words and different musicians, different kinds of music. So that's really, really fun.
Can you imagine? I haven't ever had as much fun. Well, no, with a project as that one, but it was very, very complex. You've
Yeah.
got 20 animals, 20 writers, Robin Kim. Oh, I had to call in all my friends. They were so kind. I would thank every single one of them. Robin Kimmerer and Michael Branch and Craig Childs, and on and on they go. And then let me tell you the name, Jay Baker, who's the intern at Spring Creek, who's a musician himself, and he found the musicians, extraordinary musicians.
Wonderful.
And Ephraim Payne was the filmer, the videographer, and the two people who kept it all organized were Carly Latero and Shelley Stonebrook from the Spring Creek Project. It was so much fun.
Great. Yeah. Well, again, encourage everybody to look that up. And actually, we'll turn the chat function back on at the end. And the first comment in the chat is the link to that particular one, which will lead you to all the rest. We're running a little short of time. I want to leave some time for a few comments or questions. But so could we hear another reading from you, from the book?
I'd be happy to. You had asked me to choose one happy one and one sad one. Well, I know I feel a little bad about ending on the sad one, but
well, we won't end quite there. But yeah.
Okay. This is about the common murre, a seabird. Wearing a yellow raincoat, a boy wandered the beach between the high tide line and the falling tide. He leaned over now and then to drop a treasure into his blue bucket. The little boy was whistling. Whenever he's content, he's whistling. The sandpipers piped, a gull threw back her head and brayed, the bellboy chimed. I sat on a drift log grinning as the voices came together to shake the air into something lovely and pure. The boy suddenly paused and took a few steps backwards. His whistling stopped. With his plastic shovel, the boy dug at a disheveled black form matted in blown sand. It took him several tries to pry it into his bucket. I went to him as he turned toward me. What he had in his bucket was the limp body of a black and white seabird, a common murre. Murres have always been one of the most numerous of marine birds, maybe 13 to 24 million at their peak. But now, in the warming, souring ocean, they're struggling to find the fish they need to feed their chicks and keep themselves alive. I had hoped it would be a long time before the great starving would reach the Oregon coast, but this might be the beginning of it in this blue bucket. I didn't talk to the boy about this. Carefully, we emptied the bucket onto a polished log. Here was the body of the murre, feathers broken, head hanging. Here was a blue by-the-wind sailor, a small jellyfish with a wing to catch the wind. Here was a mudstone shaped by the fossilized shell of an ancient butter clam. The murre would want to be buried here at the beach, the boy decided, in the place it knows and loves best, where its mom and dad are probably nearby looking for him. So this is what we did. We dug a hole behind the log, buried the murre in sand, and decorated the grave with the treasures the boy had found. Standing erect, looking out to sea, the boy whistled a sad song for the dead bird. Then, hand in hand, we walked back down the beach under the terrible silence of the empty sky.
Thank you. I realized shortly after I made that request of you that it was an absurd request, because one of the beauties of the book is that the happy and sad are intertwined throughout the book. So there's great beauty in that passage, which is one of the ones that is featured on the recordings as well.
That one was read by Robin Kimmerer, and
Yeah.
if people watch any, they must watch Robin read that.
Yeah, it's a tearjerker, in all the best ways.
Yes.
So I guess I just want to, before we open up to a couple questions or comments, I want to just kind of just focus on the question of how do we move forward. We've been talking about that in different ways throughout the hour, but you answer that question in the book. You say, be prepared for anger, for grief, for gratitude, and for the strongest moral resolve, which sums up a whole lot. On page 103 in your hymnals, everyone. And anything else you would like to elaborate on that, or we have been touching on this issue all along, but
I honestly believe that on this planet, the urgency of life, this glittering urgency of life, is the closest that we'll ever get to the sacred.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that. And it follows that any kind of destruction of it, any kind of wasting of it, is a profanity. Mm-hmm. So I believe that our obligation is to summon up the moral courage and the resolve to take a stand for the animals, take a stand for all these small singing lives, take a stand against poison, take a stand against habitat destruction. We can take a stand and say, I won't be part of it, and that's really good. But we can also take a stand and say, I don't believe in this and I won't allow it. And I think that's even better.
Amen. Thank you. So let me turn to a couple questions we have here. We'll try to wrap up fairly soon. I know it's late in the evening for a lot of people. So we have a question here from Lola. How do you encourage people to love and care for the world on a small scale as well as a large scale? Do you think social media and technology is hurting gratitude and love more than it encourages it? So sort of two interconnected questions there.
My grandson was so disappointed last week because if it had been a regular year, he would have been at outdoor school. Mm. But instead, the school was broadcasting videos, nature videos, which he said weren't cutting it for him. Right. Yes, I think that it is on a small scale that we will learn to love the world. It is in the near-in places. It is in the places that we visit every day, the ones that we see as we approach the airport, that we will fall in love. This is what Rachel Carson said, and I think it's a testimony to your experience, Tom, and to mine. And I won't get this exactly right, but she said, if I had one wish for the good fairy, I would wish for every child an adult who would take him out and show him the near-in places. Okay, I screwed that up, but you get the idea. Yeah. And I think that that's right. It's the salient part of that quote is the adult who will take the child by the hand.
Yes.
Show that child the persistence of life.
It doesn't necessarily have to be your own child.
Absolutely not. And how lovely when it isn't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be one. The second part of the question about social media, I'm not on Facebook. I don't have a Twitter account. I don't do that. So I really don't have a professional opinion or an informed opinion. but maybe there's opinion expressed in the fact that I don't want to spend my time on it.
Right. Enough said, I'd say. Okay, got about 3 or 4 questions here, and then they'll probably be about our time. So Melissa says, to sort of play devil's advocate in regard to the moral obligation to the earth, what about evolution in that we have developed with different abilities than other animals? Species have gone extinct before we arrived, and animal behavior has affected the earth itself. Why should it be different for the animal of humans? If we have these skills and attributes, can't we just play it out? And then she parenthetically adds, I do understand that having developed morality, or at least a capacity for it, can mean that we use that morality regarding our care of our world.
Wouldn't it be lovely to sit down with, it's Melissa, with a glass of wine and really, really think this one? It really would be wonderful. Mary Evelyn Tucker says that humans are the universe's way of pronouncing itself good. And she didn't say that exactly. That's not exactly right either. But the point is that humans are extraordinary in this land. You know, people think, well, you know, just let humans go. We're so destructive and so forth. But I don't think so at all. I think that we have a really critical place in the universe as celebrants and seekers of meaning. And just turning to the universe, throwing up your hands and admiring its glory is part of our work in the world. Yes, we have developed a set of skills that allow us to say that some things are better than others. Some things are worthy and some things are unworthy of us. Some things are right and some things are wrong. And the consequence of that, I'm not sure that it makes us different from animals, but the consequence of that is it allows us to correct our behavior. It allows us to imagine a different future depending on how we act, and a different relationship with people depending on how we act. So if I understand the question correctly, which I'm not sure that I do, I think that evolution has had a big hand in the development of moral capabilities. That's one of the gifts that we have. And once again, to quote Robin Kimmerer, she says, if you want to know what your work in the world is, ask, what are my gifts? You know, if you have certain gifts, and that tells you what you should do. Well, humans as a whole have the gift of being able to make assessments, being able to value things. And that then is our work, is to try to make them worthier, juster, more beautiful.
Yeah.
Melissa, we need to talk.
Yeah, I might add, just from my perspective as a conservation biologist, that I think there's a somewhat of a false equivalency between our species and other species' evolutionary trajectories, because the current extinction crisis is unprecedented in the history of the world in a couple of ways. One is the rate of the change of the collapse, as you've been talking about, and the other is that there's no evidence that any other had a single species causing the change. So I wrote a number of years ago that basically ethics involves choosing to not do what we can do sometimes, and that just because we have the evolutionary capacity to do something doesn't mean that we should, or that we and ultimately it is maladaptive for our species, although not necessarily, and I think that's part of Melissa's point, as individuals. It might be for some of these people making the huge profits that you mentioned.
But you picked up an aspect of the question that I had missed, but you're absolutely, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. Okay, next from Kathy Rose. Hi, Kathy. She says, what a wonderful merging of music and the natural world in your book. Great idea, and you carried it through so beautifully. I love the idea of also singing to nature our songs within ourselves, our grieving in all of this to help comfort their suffering, yet also our joy arising from the incredible beauty. Your book sings to all those you have written about. Thank you so much for your love and your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. I was about to ask you for an easy question, Tom, and then look what shows up.
Yeah, right. A comment from Frank. He says, how, like the gentle incoming uplifting wave, do we enlist humanity in reducing human population?
There's a lot of people working hard on that. We've made some terrible mistakes in the past, which is make it even harder. Terrible mistakes having to do with valuing some people rather than others or over others. And the positive thing now that I'm seeing in this movement has to do with the education of women and the empowerment of women, and the providing them with the means of making decisions about their families, which I think is absolutely essential. Educating them so that they can make realistic decisions about what they're capable of doing in addition to or instead of being a mother. So we are, the population is, the rate of population increase is slowing, as I understand it. And it may be that that coincides with the raising up of the standards of the status of women.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, we're running short on time, so unfortunately I apologize. I'm not going to be able to get to every one of the questions. I do see that Melissa from the earlier question piped up that she lives in Corvallis, so you guys can talk.
Oh, okay, good. You're not behind me.
Michael asks, what might a genuine metanoia look like, sound like, feel like, at least in places, if not globally?
You're going to have to define metanoia.
I was hoping you would. I have not heard the term, but I'm not
I
sure.
have not heard the term either.
So Michael, if you want to chip in, and meanwhile, I'll you can add another comment. That a couple of comments that have been here for a bit. One from Deborah, she says it's just a comment. She said, watching the video and seeing the stars made me think of the poetic phrase, a blanket of stars. Even though I live near Lake Erie and I should be able to see many stars, light pollution prevents that. I will never see the blanket, which makes me sad.
And it should make you angry. Someone took that from you. And maybe it wasn't a deliberate taking, but it's a taking nonetheless. But stand against it. There are lots of ways to darken all these lights.
Yeah, yeah. Michael comes back in to define the term metanoia, which is repentance or change of heart.
Okay, so let's have the question again.
So the question again is, what might a genuine repentance or change of heart look like, sound like, feel like, at least in places, if not globally?
Boy, that's a really, really interesting thing. And maybe this is what we need to do, is to find these rituals of repentance and rituals of asking for forgiveness. I mean, other cultures do that very beautifully, and I think ours does it not at all. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that that comes quickly to mind. Nothing glib about that question, and it doesn't invite a quick answer. Repentance. That's what we need. I don't know how we're going to get there.
Okay, we'll just have time for a couple of more. Cindy says, upstander then rather than activist, as I found on my Starbucks cup, to take a stand, as you say.
What?
I didn't quite follow that. So
she found on her Starbucks cup a phrase.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Cindy, if you want to send in a clarification. Meanwhile, I have a comment comment from Olga, who says that she read this morning, much to her dismay, that after having proclaimed the strengthening of the Endangered Species Act to be a priority, President Biden barely increased the budget for the act above what Trump had done. How do you make these people with the power and the money feel accountable both to voters and to all life on the planet after making such promises?
Yeah, there's this famous story about FDR, who had a group come to him and come to him with a set of demands. And he said, I agree with you on every point. Now make me do it. And I think we're seeing that with President Biden too. I'm deeply disappointed that he's not doing more to protect public land from new fracking, which he said he would do and has not done. How do we make them do it? I think it has to come partly from the conscience of the streets. You know, I think that the time for an effective legislature is perhaps gone. I'd love to know how change was created so quickly during the pandemic, and with the well, you know how it was created so quickly with the Black Lives Matter movement and the massive demonstrations in the streets. I think that's how you make a politician do it, is to say that there are consequences in not doing it.
Right. So just a couple of things to end, and I'll have just a couple closing comments. Could you mention again the name of the film that you just released?
It's called Bedrock Rights. It has to do with the narrative, a new narrative for global action against climate change and fracking. And if they're interested, I would also direct them. It's also on YouTube under the Spring Creek list. On the Spring Creek Project's channel is a film that I did a couple years ago called The Extinction Variations. And it is a collaboration with a pianist where I weave words into the movements of Rachmaninoff that she plays so beautifully on the piano.
So, and the final thing is someone asking if we could repeat the book and the music website or put on the screen. I actually can't put any right on the screen from this perspective. I will hold the book up. It's called Earth's Wild Music, Celebrating and Defending the Songs of the Natural World. And I would mention again that our co-sponsor, the Peregrine Book Company, has it featured right on the homepage of their website right now. That's peregrinebookcompany.com. And I think we're about out of time. I apologize again for those who couldn't get to every comment or question. And want to end mostly by thanking you, Kathy, for your wonderful work in the world, as well as for this wonderful conversation here this evening. And we'll mention again that if you mentioned at the beginning, but some of you came in later, this whole talk will be archived on the Natural History Institute YouTube channel. It'll be up there by this time tomorrow. And so feel free, we encourage you to direct your people who may be interested who weren't able to be here tonight to that resource to help spread the conversation further. Again, if you are new to the Natural History Institute, we welcome you to the community and encourage you to check out our website, our YouTube channel, and all of the resources. Thanks again also to our wonderful set of co-sponsors, in addition to the Peregrine Book Company, Counterpoint Press, the Safina Center, the Spring Creek Project, Center for Humans and Nature, the Desert Lab at Tumamoc Hill, at the University of Arizona, and Playa. So thank you, all of you, for making time in your busy lives to be here with us this evening. And again, thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. So with that, we'll end for now, and we'll carry forth this good work into the world. Good night,
Thanks, Tom.
everyone.
Good night. Thanks, everybody.